Human beings can't fly, they can't bite you with a venom, and they are not that huge. So what does make them special? What makes human beings so unique is their high self-consciousness. So I wanted to know, what is consciousness and what causes the ability to be highly self-aware? Now, I know that other species do have the ability of being self-conscious, but I'm more interested in the phenomenon of the consciousness of Homo sapiens in particular. Anyways, as I was surfing the web, I found out that there was an agreement among intellectuals about this topic. Some intellectuals believed that consciousness can be only explained by religion. Others tried to illustrate the conscious experience through philosophy. Lastly, but not last, there were the ones who thought that consciousness must be explained by biology or science to be more specific. And one of the believers in neuroscience was a biologist from the 90s, Francis Crick, with his colleague Christopher Koch. They published a paper about this matter. Essentially, they were arguing that yes, this topic must be in the hands of scientists, and yes, our technology is good enough to study the brain. They literally wrote, and I quote, "The time to start the scientific attack is now." So they ain't messing around. Let's see what they have to say about consciousness in their paper. We can state bluntly that the major question that neuroscientists must first answer, meaning we can say confidently that the most important question that neuroscience must give us answers about is the consciousness question. It is probably that at any moment some active process in your head correlate with consciousness, while others do not. What is the difference between them? I know, right? Okay, so we have neurons that are correlating with consciousness and neurons that do not correlate with consciousness. Now, what do they mean by correlates? Do they mean that these neurons become active once the consciousness switch is on, and that there are neurons in which their activities are not affected by the consciousness switch, whether it is on or off? I think you need to get real deep into the neuroscience rabbit hole to know what do they mean exactly by neurons that do not correlate with consciousness and neurons that do correlate with consciousness. The only solution I have in hand is just to rely on my basic understanding of what I think they mean by correlating with consciousness, which is there are neurons that their activities stop and start accordingly with whether their brain is conscious or not, like whether you're asleep or awake. And there are neurons that their activities do not stop and start accordingly to whether you are sleeping or not. So how can we tell the difference between those two types of neurons? In particular, are the neurons involved of any particular neuron type? What is special, if anything, about their connections? And what is special, if anything, about their way of firing? Wait. Okay, so the paper presents three major questions in the quest of understanding consciousness. The first question is, what are the different types of neurons? The second question is, how do these different neurons connect to each other? Bonus, do different neurons have different ways of connecting with each other? The third question, now to be honest, the expression firing is slightly confusing, but anyways, I think it is clear what do they mean, and they mean that what kind of energy that keeps the neurons working. I think that's kind of clear, like everyone knows that it's electricity, I guess. Maybe in the 90s they didn't know about this, but anyways, now these are the main three questions to solve. The paper then mentions an interesting thing. It says that when a neuron is correlating with consciousness, we call this NCC. What does NCC stand for though? I decided to search on the internet about it, and I didn't get the desirable results from my search, like a national certification corporation of a certain random community college, like no. So naturally, I wrote the word neuroscience with it to avoid any weird results. So there it is. NCC stands for Neural Correlates of Consciousness. Very intuitive, I guess, and I found two attractive links to click on. Neural Correlate of Consciousness by Wikipedia and Neural Correlate of Consciousness, Progress and Problems by the magazine Nature. I decided to click on Nature to diversify the economy in this video. Key points. The neural correlates of consciousness, NCC, are the minimum neural mechanisms jointly sufficient for any one specific consciousness experience. It is the literal definition of NPCs. I just used the milk to death NPC Wojak picture just because the names are pretty similar, but I did not expect the similarities to be increasing at all. Anyways, NCC is the lowest possible effort from the neurons to form a conscious experience for the creature. In this case, the creature in question is the human being. I think the same concept applies to all creatures, I guess. Let's see if this article from the Nature magazine is interesting enough to continue reading it or not. And yeah, this article, I guess, dropped some odd bars, so I guess I should continue reading it. The NCC, neural correlative consciousness, has three types: full NCC, the whole neural flesh, supporting the experience of consciousness in general, regardless of the specific content in the conscious experience. Then the second type is content-specific NCC. This refers to neurons that correlate with consciousness for a particular thing. For example, some neurons are active only when you are going through the experience of absorbing a face in front of you, whether you are seeing the face, imagining it, or dreaming about it. I know that I previously mentioned sleeping as an example for being unconscious, but you can replace it with being in a coma or being dead, or you can say sleeping without a dream to make things easier to understand. Now, the third type of NCC is background conditions. This is about the part of the brain that does not help you directly experiencing things, but rather it helps the neurons that help you experiencing things. As I was reading this article, I found a really cool thing: the electrophysiological signatures. Just look at these pictures. It's just so beautiful. And it is a type of brain imaging, by the way. And what is even more beautiful than electrophysiological signatures is neuroradiology. Just look at these cool shapes. Very menacing. Especially this one, I love it. Anyhow, I took the phrase electrophysiological signatures from this segment of Nature's article about NCC. So, as I understand it, an electrophysiological signature is a pattern that neuroscientists saw over and over again into many people's brain, that they noticed that this pattern always means the same thing. So, like for example, this is a signature called gamma range oscillations, or gamma wave for short. And this is how this pattern of waves looks like. According to the segment of the article, this signature is commonly related with consciousness. However, this known pattern of waves is more likely to mean that the brain is focusing on a particular thing, rather than meaning that the brain is just conscious. Okay, this is way too much for me. I want to go back to our original paper. Now, time to go back into thinking about how to employ neuroscience to understand the general experience of consciousness. Now, we know what is NCC and what are the types of NCC, and this part of the paper is closed with this statement: whenever some information is represented in the NCC, it is represented in the consciousness, because NCC is the minimum amount of neural work to form the experience of consciousness. In approaching the problem, we made the tentative assumption: okay, they are referring to an older paper they wrote, and I do not care enough to look for it, to be honest. The next statement, they are going to say what was the gist of it, so I don't need to go back and read it. That all different aspects of consciousness, pain, visual awareness, self-consciousness, and so on, employ the basic mechanisms, or perhaps a few such mechanisms. Basically, they are hoping that if they manage to understand one aspect of the consciousness, understanding other aspects of consciousness would be easy because they all function similarly. Sounds like a lot of wishful thinking, but hey, maybe Mother Nature will be merciful with our boys. We made the personal decision that several topics should be set aside or merely stand without further discussion, for experience had shown us that valuable time can be wasted arguing about them without coming to any conclusion. So there are upcoming 4 things that our lovely authors are asking us to not bring it up and arguing about it too much, because it is basically a waste of time. As for the first thing, everyone has a rough idea of what is meant by being conscious. For now, it is better to avoid a precise definition of consciousness, because of the dangers of premature definition, either misleading or overly restrictive, or even both. So they don't want us to ask for a concrete definition of what is consciousness in an attempt to know what even consciousness is. I think that makes perfect sense to me. As for the second thing that they want us to set aside, the TLDR of it is we are going to rely on experiments done on animal brains, and we know that they are not as highly conscious as the average human, so don't flame us in the comments of this paper. When it comes to the third thing, it is not profitable at this stage to argue about whether simple animals or even plants are conscious. It is probable, however, that consciousness correlates to some extent with the degree of complexity of the nervous system, and plants and these much more simpler animals, their nervous system is not that complex. When one clearly understands, both in detail and in principle, what consciousness involves in humans, then will be the time to consider the problem of consciousness in much simpler animals. For the same reason, we will not ask whether some parts of our nervous system will have a special isolated consciousness of their own. If you say, of course my spinal cord is conscious, but it is not telling me, who is saying this? Who said that, man? Like, so that is a very, very terrifying possibility, to be honest. And a good topic to use for a future video. The writers proceed, we are not at the stage going to spend time arguing with you about it, nor will we spend time discussing whether a digital computer could be conscious or not. Okay, this has to be my favorite segment, my favorite part of this paper so far. So again, TLDR is they don't want to get into discussions about whether this or that thing can be conscious. They're focusing on Homo sapiens. Now, so far, there are three things that our lovely authors are asking us very politely to set aside. As for the fourth thing, they wrote, there are many forms of consciousness, such as those associated with seeing, thinking, emotion, pain, and so on. Self-consciousness, that is, a self-reflective aspect of consciousness, is probably a special case of consciousness. In our view, it is better left to one side of the moment, especially as it will be difficult to study self-consciousness in a monkey. Also, various rather unusual states, such as the hypnotic state and lucid dreams and sleepwalking, not be considered here, since they do not seem to us to have special features that would make them experimentally advantageous. So they're not saying that, lucid dreams or sleepwalking is not conscious, but they think that it will not get us anywhere at the moment. Also, consciousness would be studied as a whole instead of studying like thinking alone or pain alone. Alright, all the disclaimers are cleared out. I think the picture is pretty clear for moving forward. I will end this video here. I will get into the first actual thought forward after all these disclaimers in the next video.